Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another research recap. My name is Lisa. I am the owner and head nutrition coach of Nutrition Coaching and Life, where we help people lose fat, gain muscle, recomp their bodies, all sorts of health and fitness things. But every Wednesday, I like to jump on here to talk about some of the latest findings in research as it pertains to fitness and nutrition. And I like to talk about them to you in order to help you also, but also just in order to keep me up to date. But yeah, if you enjoy this kind of chat, please do me a favor, subscribe to my channel. Also check out some of our other content on Instagram, on our website. We have some freebies, our podcast, of course, and I'm just so grateful for you to be here. So welcome. Today we are going to talk about: could a habitual sleep restriction of 1 to 2 hours be detrimental to the benefits of resistance training? This was particularly interesting to me because I used to do shift work, and so I was kind of sleep deprived for a few years on a regular basis, on a consistent basis. I would probably sleep like 5 hours on average, and very poor quality as well. And I know for sure that it was affecting my mental health and my hormones as well. But I'm very interested to look at this research as it pertains to its effect on resistance training. So yes, this was an article by Borba et al. 2024, so a very recent article. And I'm sure some of you listening as well are perhaps involved in shift work, whether you're a nurse, whether you are a fighter, whether you're some other kind of first responder. So hopefully this is of interest to you. But even if you are someone with a quote unquote regular sleep schedule, many people that I personally know, they think they can get away with 5 or 6 hours on average just sleeping just because they're busy. We're all busy, and oftentimes, unfortunately, sleep is the first thing that tends to go. But yes, let's look into it. Let's get right into it. So in this paper, we are investigating the impact of habitual sleep restriction on resistance training outcomes in adult subjects. The focus lies in understanding how varying sleep durations affect strength and muscle mass improvements when engaged in resistance training with elastic bands. Please do not switch off just because you heard elastic bands. I do hope that many of you know from the pandemic or whatever that you can in fact build a good amount of muscle with resistance band training, particularly, or at least for the upper body. It is a bit more challenging for the lower body, but for the upper body you definitely can, especially if you are new to training or if you're detrained or whatever. But even more advanced trainees, like if you're traveling or so, can be a really good form to just at least maintain your current muscle mass. So don't switch off. We are going to get into the details as to what kind of exercise regime they were doing also. But first, let's talk about the objectives of this study. So the objectives were to evaluate the effect of habitual sleep restriction, specifically sleep durations of less than 7 hours versus 7 hours, on strength and muscle mass in the participants, and to determine if sleep quality influences the training adaptation to resistance exercise. I also found this study very interesting or great because it's not taking the extremes of like a group sleeping 3 hours per night and another group sleeping 9 hours per night. It's a lot more realistic if we're talking about oversleep 7 hours and under 7 hours, which I think many people fall into that under 7 hours category, unfortunately. So in this study, what they did was they actually divided the 36 participants into 3 groups based on their sleep durations and resistance training involvement. So the first group was a group where they slept less than 7 hours. That they were 42 years on average. They had an average weight of 85 kilos, 27 BMI, so slightly higher, not necessarily very lean or very trained. Their average total sleep time was 6 hours and 17 minutes per day, and their average nighttime sleep, so if we're talking about like naps in between or whatever, their average nighttime sleep was 5 hours and 47 minutes, so a little bit less. Then we had the second group where also 12 individuals, 38 years of age on average, about 10 kilos lighter than, or 7 kilos lighter than in the previous group. BMI also a little bit lower. The average time spent sleeping was 7 hours and 47 minutes, so about an hour and a half more than the other group. And the average nighttime sleep was 7 hours and 16 minutes. The control group, it doesn't really matter how much sleep they got, but they got 7 hours and 30 minutes on average, but they didn't do any resistance training. So that's kind of, they needed a control group nonetheless. So the primary focus, once again, was on the differences in sleep duration between the groups. The less than 7 hour group was averaging 2 hours less than the recommended 7 hours, totaling around 5 hours and 47 minutes of nightly sleep. And the 7 hours group, the other second group, matched the recommended sleep duration of 7 hours. So now in the training protocol, what did they actually do? I also have to admit, I do not know how they managed to control the duration of sleep, like if they set an alarm, or like what was if that was just their natural sleep rhythm and that's how they were grouped, kind of thing. So yeah, I don't think that there was an intervention per se where they were like, you got to wake up after 5 hours and 17 minutes. I think it was just more like, hey, where do you fall amongst the spectrum? We're gonna put you into this or that group. So yeah, anyway, the training protocol was that they used elastic bands. They engaged in 16 resistance training sessions over the span of the study, with a training schedule 3 times per week, and about 48 hours of rest in between sessions, or minimum of 48 hours of rest in between sessions. The exercises included shoulder abduction, so sort of like a lateral raise, and then a seated row, bicep curls, and push-ups, obviously without the bands. And when it comes to the execution, so they did 2 sets, really not a lot, 2 sets with a 1-minute rest between the sets, where they aimed for the maximum repetition approach for each participant to reach their limit. So they had, of course, a variation or a variety of bands that they used, and then they basically said, okay, I want you to do shoulder abduction, grab a band, or let's establish where you can find a band where you can do about 10 repetitions. So 9 to 11 would be awesome. Or the seated row, there was a 20 maximum repetitions. A sort of a range acceptable was 18 to 22. And they also specified the tempo, so they wanted the concentric phase, the pulling phase, to be 1 second, and then the eccentric, the lowering phase, to be 2 seconds. I think the same applied in terms of tempo for the push-ups. I don't know how they regulated there in the sense of, if someone's already pretty good at push-ups, how many do you do? But I assume just their maximum. So there was an adaptation and a familiarization phase also. The participants were first familiarized with the exercises using a low-tension elastic band to mitigate fatigue and to ensure simply proper form. And that was done through 10 repetitions prior to the actual training to set the initial training intensity. And then there was, again, where are we at? So they took measurements in order to test the outcomes. So we took pre and post measurements. They measured body mass, so in kilograms, and they measured body mass index, or calculated body mass index. They measured the arm muscle area with arm circumference and tricep skin fold measurements. They measured the maximum repetition numbers for each exercise, and they measured the sleep quality as well through something called the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Questionnaire. And they evaluated sleep time, sleep latency, sleep efficiency using something called actigraphy. The hypertrophy was assessed through arm circumference and tricep skin fold measurements, also in order to see changes in terms of body composition. The pre-training assessments were conducted one day before the training began, and the post-training assessment was taken 2 days after the last training session, exactly mirroring the pre-training session. And additionally, sleep quality was continuously monitored throughout the study using the actigraphy data log during the first and the last week of the intervention. They used proper statistical analytics or analysis. But let's dive right into the key findings, because I don't want to bore you with which exact method they used for the statistical analytics or analysis. So the key findings were that there were significant improvements in maximal repetition numbers post-training for both groups, the 7 hours and the less than 7 hour sleep group, across various exercising or across all exercises. The maximum repetition numbers were notably higher in the 7 hour group compared to the control group for specific exercises like seated row and bicep curls. Again, like not surprising if you're not doing the 16 weeks of training. Of course, your repetition maximums are going to be higher than if you are training. I guess that makes sense. There were no significant differences in body mass or BMI between post and pre-training. The arm circumference and the muscle mass index increased post-training in both sleep duration groups, with the tricep skin fold measurements reflecting lower values slightly lower values after training in the less than 7 hour groups. However, no significant differences, so no significant difference in hypertrophy. A marked increase in strength and muscle mass for participants involved for all the participants involved in the training sessions, regardless of their sleep duration. Now, before you again switch off preemptively, I do want to add quite a few things here that I think are noteworthy. Before I do, though, I will read the author's conclusion. But yeah, I think we need to remember that this is just a 16-week study, or not even 16 weeks, 16 training sessions. So that means, maybe 5 weeks or so in total, meaning if you sleep a little bit less for 5 weeks, it might not have a detrimental effect. But if that is something that's chronic that you've been doing for 10 years or so, who knows what difference that makes on your resistance training. Or I think that there is plenty of other research out there indicating that is not beneficial for hypertrophy or strength gains. And more than anything, also, I want to point out that these exercises are rather low stress for your central nervous system. If they would have had in there things like deadlifts, like heavy deadlifts or heavy squats and things that like really do tend to stress the nervous system a lot more than a banded row or even a push-up, I dare postulate that would have been a different outcome, or at least that the people would have felt more fatigued at the end of the intervention, if they were in the lower sleep group. But anyway, so the conclusion of the authors is that a habitual reduction of 1 to 2 hours in the recommended sleep duration of 7 hours does not significantly interfere with the positive outcomes of resistance training. Their findings indicate that participants who generally sleep less were still able to enhance their muscle strength and muscle endurance through resistance exercises, demonstrated by notable improvements in maximum number of repetitions and arm muscle area. This was true even though sleep quality metrics did not show significant improvements in either the sleep restricted group or those with recommended sleep duration. So I do want to talk about practical recommendations or takeaways from this before I kind of like give it to you in bullet points. Though I think like what that tells me is that if you have a shorter period of time where sleep might not be optimal, let's just say maybe you're traveling and it's not great, or you have a stressful time coming up, or you have a baby and for a few months you're just not going to have that much sleep, I think the takeaway is that for a short amount of time some training is still beneficial. I personally would recommend dialing in the intensity or the stress for the nervous system and maybe doing things like shifting more from compound lifts to isolation work, or from lower rep ranges and heavy loads to lighter loads and higher rep ranges, in order to alleviate some of that stress on the central nervous system. But the point for me is that we can still benefit from strength training even if we're not sleeping optimally, so to speak. So also here, the practical takeaways are that they recommend flexibility in sleep practices. So athletes and fitness enthusiasts may feel encouraged to maintain their training schedule even if they occasionally sleep less than the ideal amount, basically what I just said. The research suggests that short-term reductions in sleep may not drastically impact training adaptations. They do say that we can incorporate some elastic bands. The use of elastic bands as a training tool was shown to be effective, highlighting their potential in various environments, such as home workouts or for individuals with limited access to gym facilities. This can promote inclusivity and accessibility in strength training. Again, the caveat here that they pushed to maximum like failure, or like they were close to failure, so I think that's a really important part. And B, that was just upper body exercises. So for lower body, it does get progressively difficult to overload your hammies, your glutes, and so on with just resistant bands or body weight exercise. It's not impossible, certainly better than nothing, and certainly better than or a possibility to maintain muscle mass potentially. But for many people or more advanced trainees, possibly not enough in order to maintain or to build muscle mass, rather. Point number 3, or takeaway number 3, is to focus on the individual strain. So the study implies that personal adaptation could play a role. Individuals accustomed to less sleep may cope better with resistance training than previously thought. This stresses that training programs should be personalized according to an individual's capabilities and history. Again, I think we do need to differentiate between short-term, long-term, and just in general keeping an eye on that overall allostatic load, or whatever you want to call it, stress load, so to speak. Maybe in those instances also utilizing things like wearables in order to kind of stay ahead of the curve, and just knowing when you should possibly or probably pull back from your training. And then point number 4, making sure that we're educating our clients and ourselves on recovery. So while the study indicates that short periods of sleep restriction may not harm training outcomes, it does emphasize the importance of recovery and overall performance. Educating individuals about balanced lifestyle choices, including adequate sleep for optimal recovery, remains critical. I think Andrew Huberman, of course, is doing a wonderful job on saying that even something small like non-sleep deep rest protocols throughout the day can not make up for lack of sleep, but can still help us function better than if we didn't do them throughout the day, and make us perform better mentally and physically if we implement them. So small pockets of meditation, of those kind of protocols can certainly help if we continuously or know for longer periods of time, like when you are having a baby, that you're not necessarily able to adjust your sleep schedule. And then lastly, and I apologize, the numbering here on this slide is off actually, but lastly, the findings could guide sports professionals and trainers in designing resistance training programs for individuals who might struggle to achieve ideal sleep durations, reinforcing that consistency in physical activity can yield considerable benefits regardless of sleep challenges. So I do think that is better. Like, yes, sometimes when you haven't slept well and you're just feeling like crap, it might be better to stay in bed. And certainly if you have the possibility to extend your sleep to 7 hours or beyond, the research is so clear that it has so many benefits for your metabolism, for your hormones, for your for just your mental health and literally everything else. So don't use this paper as an excuse to sleep little if you have the possibility to extend it, but also if you're traveling or for a while you don't have the possibility to adjust your sleep schedule, don't use that as an excuse to not exercise. So overall, the reflection is that this study opens up avenues for more research around the intricate balance between sleep, performance, and training methods. It poses questions about the long-term effects of sleep patterns and reinforces the idea that while sleep is crucial for performance, various factors contribute to effective training adaptations. Encouraging individuals to stay committed to their exercise routines, even during demanding schedules, while considering sleep's role in recovery and performance, can promote a more holistic approach to fitness. Remember, a well-rounded perspective on health, including sleep, nutrition, and exercise, is crucial for overall well-being. I would absolutely love to hear your guys' thoughts on this or experiences as well. Have you ever gone through a period of less sleep? How did you feel in terms of your training with that? Did you adjust your training, and did that help then in turn? And we also know, like with people stepping on stage, and in the last few weeks, their sleep tends to be a little bit crappier because of lower energy availability. And so often in that time, we wouldn't necessarily have a lot of like, hey, let's push you to your 1 rep max and see how you get on with that. And we do adjust to maybe taking out those back squats and putting in more leg extensions like presses, or adjusting the repetition ranges also. So anyway, let me know your thoughts on this paper in general, on sleep deprived training. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. As I said, go check out some of our other content. I'm excited that you took the time to listen to this, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.